Right, so welcome everyone, and thank you for attending this great Indonesia Study Group seminar. Despite the freezing weather, it's always good to see people in person. So welcome again. Let me start by acknowledging and celebrating the first Australian people, the Ngambri and Ngunao people, on whose land we meet today, and pay my respect to their elders, past and present. So today we have two great speakers, our own Emeritus Associate Professor Ibu Lesley Potter.
Thank you.
And Dr. Chun Sheng, who will join us online through Zoom. So they will present and launch their new book, Transforming Borneo, which was published by the ISIS and Assoc Institute in Singapore just late last year, right?
That's right.
Yeah. So we all know Ibu Lesley. She has decades of research experience in Indonesia. She started her first ethnography work in 1983.
That's right.
When some of us were not even born, I think.
Exactly. including my co-author.
And including me. So yeah, and Ibu Lesley retired in 2003, but look at her, 20 years later with her new book, right? So that makes me feel a bit ashamed actually about myself. So and Dr. Goh is an associate at Harvard University Asia Center, and he has diverse and rich experience as well on doing research in Malaysia, especially, and working on sustainability issues, and has been working with the government of Malaysia, WWF, and IRENA, and FAO. So before we start, as a reminder, this is a hybrid event, and we will be taking questions from the people in the room today, as well as the people who join us online. So for people who join us online, please write your questions in the Q&A box, and Catherine here will read your questions later. So we will have 45 minutes presentation from Ibu Lesley and as well as Dr. Chun Sheng. So without further ado, so I will invite Ibu Lesley to present her new book, Transforming Borneo. Thank you.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. Could we have the slide, please? Yeah, so just an introduction to Borneo. I guess you probably all know these things. The world's third largest island, the political subdivision. Indonesia has 73%, Malaysia 26%, Brunei 1%. Interestingly, the Malaysian states have more autonomy over land use, including forestry, than their Indonesian counterparts. Although following decentralization, some of the districts have a level of freedom from Jakarta. Sometimes this is only temporary, but especially those with far-sighted governors. So this is a beautiful population map, which was drawn here by the Cartogis group, and that is 2020, gives the general population pressure in various areas, the density. You can see there's a very large area in the center, which has very few people. Most of the cities are around the coast. And then you have some fairly dense areas of settlement, such as the Hulu Sungai in South Kalimantan, rice growing area, and other ports like Sandakan and so on. So that there is a bit of a controversy as to which of the places, which of the cities is largest. Chun Sheng says Kuching, obviously, in Sarawak. Samarinda and Banjarmasin and Banjarbaru together all have about 800,000, 900,000 people. But when Nusantara gets relocated and properly populated, This will mean that there is Balikpapan, Nusantara, Samarinda as one city, which would soon be Borneo's biggest. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide, please. If you just compare the population density with the elevation, you'll see that the general limitations are quite serious posed by the uplands on settlement in Borneo, large areas with fewer than 10 persons per square kilometre. A high proportion of this upland is included in the heart of Borneo, much of it already protected, containing a large part of the remaining forest and the diverse natural environments on the island. And roads are beginning to push into this area, the resources of which will become more valuable as climate change impacts the lowlands, as it is already doing with floods and droughts and all sorts of other problems. So care must be taken to continue to protect these environments. Next, please. So first of all, we look at what was happening before the attempts at sustainability. 5 decades of land-based development. First of all, massive timber extraction. The first graph shows the imports of hardwood logs to Japan from the 3 source areas in the first, what you might consider as the first period, 1970 to 1987, with Japan being the early recipient of much of the timber from Borneo. Imports of logs from Kalimantan declined rapidly after, after 1980, when they began to transition to plywood. Sabah and Sarawak quickly filled the gap, while Indonesia for a few years became the world's leading exporter of tropical plywood. I might say also, going back a bit, Sarawak experienced one of the most rapid log clearances in Southeast Asia, led by its 6 timber tycoons, who then started growing palm oil. Natural timbers had been heavily depleted by the 1990s, attention shifting to planted forests, largely of acacia, sometimes eucalyptus, as raw material for pulp and paper plants. However, originally the idea was that there might be 10 or 12 plants, but only 1 remained, and the rest are all, of course, in Sumatra, these huge plants in Riau. Meanwhile, illegal logging was widespread, especially after decentralization. Logs were smuggled across the borders to Sabah and Sarawak, an important source of local revenue. So there's just one example of that, which I found in 2002. Next, please. Just a few mega land-based developments from the 1990s. Hydropower dams in Sarawak. The Bakung Dam is the largest dam in Southeast Asia. Destruction of 70,000 hectares of forest, relocation of 10,000 people. These were all Orang Ulu, mainly Kenya people. And the same happened with the other dams. The Batangai, it was Iban people, and then the Wurun Dam was Penang people. And so a lot of the Orang Ulu who've been living in long houses along these rivers had to be relocated because of these dams. Hydropower has been seen as the growth engine of the Sarawak corridor of renewable energy called SCORE to provide power to a wider region, but with serious environmental and human costs. Large-scale coal mining in East and South Kalimantan, very important. Largest mines were opened in the 1990s. PT Kaltim Prima Coal, I guess the world's largest coal mine in Sangatta. There was a big rise in coal production and exports from 2000 to 2019. The downside is huge numbers of water-filled abandoned pits with many child drownings. The coal industry, of course, has powerful political connections. And then construction of the Reinherited Rice Estate, the MRP or the PLG in Indonesian, launched in 1995 a project of Suharto to boost Indonesia's rice output, 4 million hectares of peat forest with planned transmigrant labour. No engineering studies or effective environmental assessments. Its launch coincided with a long drought, the peat dried out and severe fires raged, releasing large amounts of carbon to the atmosphere. And although the project was cancelled in 1999 and there were efforts made to re-water the peat areas, these have been largely frustrated and peat fires have continued following oil palm planting, with many estates located illegally on the deep peat. Thank you. Okay, rapid oil palm expansion from about 2000. Much of the recent production is on peat soils, especially in Sarawak and central Kalimantan. So the map by C4 shows the oil palm in black, and there's also areas of swamp forest, which is sort of pale bluish. You can see that a lot of the oil palm is fairly close to the coast, and it's also in very low-lying areas, something to consider when one thinks about sea level rise. The spread of oil palm has also generated many social issues as plantations have occupied lands of local people. Apart from West Kalimantan, where historically smallholders were assisted by states, oil palm smallholders are relatively few in Kalimantan compared to Sumatra. However, new schemes for independent smallholders assisted by local credit unions and NGOs have been developing quite rapidly with field schools, and we went to one of those in 2018. At the moment, for 2019, the prominence of central Kalimantan with few smallholders and certainly large areas devoted to oil palm. Next, please. This is towards sustainability. It didn't quite make it into it, but from about 2010, moves towards sustainability of land-based production were beginning. Criticism of forest destruction and specifically oil palm was increasing, especially in Europe and North America, where the orangutan was often used as a symbol for necessary change. Borneo's emissions, especially from deforestation and peat fires, been recognised as very high, while the health and economic impacts of transboundary haze have placed the spotlight on operators involved in agricultural expansion. Indonesia finally ratified the ASEAN Transboundary Haze Agreement in 2014, 12 years after it was signed. However, serious peat fires still occurred in 2015 and 2019. And you can see a modified C4 map there, which shows the deep peat, where you're not supposed to actually cultivate, and a lot of the burning which went on, particularly in 2015. And there was a study by Greenpeace, which focused on one particular estate, PT Global Indo, in the MRP, which had occupied transmigrants land and has expanded its holdings by burning scrub, setting fire to the underlying peat. Of course, they said that Greenpeace had used the wrong map, but Greenpeace had some pretty good photographs of what exactly happened there. So a moratorium on primary forests and peatlands, suspending the issue of new logging licenses, issued by the Indonesian government in 2011, extended indefinitely from 2019, and a moratorium on new oil palm concessions for 3 years. Malaysia also pledged to keep 50% of its land forested. This could, of course, include plantations. Many individual companies promised no deforestation, no peat, no exploitation. However, such pledges are not legally binding, while occurrences of cheating are not rare. Next one, please. So let's look at the heart of the book, which really looks into bioeconomy and ecoeconomy strategies for Borneo. So we go into various examples of these two ways of trying to bring about sustainability of this very degraded environment. Bioeconomy seeks to offer a strategic means to reconcile socioeconomic progress with environmental sustainability, increasing economic output while reducing resource consumption through improving system efficiency from upstream, that is intensifying primary production, to downstream, creating new products and markets. The bioeconomy is pretty popular. Ecoeconomy, a conservation-oriented economic strategy, maintaining a harmonious relationship with nature, is prioritized over economic productivity. The concept portrays a self-sufficient landscape with small-scale farming systems and alternative income-generating mechanisms such as ecosystem restoration and green businesses like ecotourism. So I put two photos here just to show the difference. The top one shows a corporation's monocrop plantation in Lamandau, central Kalimantan, and below is a mixed smallholder plot in Sanggau. The old palm shares the land there with rice and traditional mixed forest. They're called tembawang, a source of fruits and vegetables. No doubt the plantation owner could increase his output and reduce the land occupied if he used the very best cultivars, inputs and techniques. No doubt the smallholder could do the same if she turned her farm into an oil palm monocrop. She only has 2 hectares. Cultural factors like the wish to grow rice may deter her from doing that. There were also sanctions in the village against destroying Tumbawan. Next, please. So let's look at some examples of the bioeconomy. What's that? I can't see what's here. Thank you. So this graph compares the yields of crude palm oil in tonnes per hectare from 2011 to 2019 in the 5 districts of Kalimantan, Sabah, Sarawak, Sumatra, and Peninsular Malaysia. Great differences in the performances of jurisdictions over that period, with West Kalimantan experiencing generally the lowest yields. That's the one in green. Peninsular Malaysia, the highest, except for a drop in the El Niño drought of 2015. Also, yields in some jurisdictions have trended down while others have increased their yields. When you start to look into it, many factors are involved, ranging from upgrading crop breeding and genomics, improving plantation management, through to climate and soil conditions and the involvement of smallholders. The latter group have had a range of experiences when attempting to grow oil palm, depending on whether they were organised, sometimes called plasma smallholders, or independent. There was more effort to place them in organised schemes in Sarawak and Sabah, and these were only marginally successful. Plasma schemes evolved gradually in Indonesia, eventually becoming more stringent, giving less land to the people and more to the plantation, while independent smallholders were less common in Kalimantan than in Sumatra. So 21% of planted areas of oil palm in Malaysian Borneo, 18% in Kalimantan, but more in West Kalimantan. And their yields tended to be consistently lower than those of the estates, mainly because they preferred to use the land for other things as well. Okay, next one, please. Activating underutilized low carbon land. Underutilized low carbon land, sometimes called ULC land, may not necessarily be degraded former gold mining land, as in West Kalimantan, or land still under a cover of alang-alang grassland in North Kalimantan. While primary forest is usually given high conservation value, HCV, degraded or secondary forest may be excluded from ULC land, its carbon status determined by its ability to be eventually restored. Such patches may be classified as potentially high carbon stock HCS forest. The North Kalimantan picture obviously includes many patches of forest, probably of both HCV and HCS status, and is in fact located in the Kayan Mentawai National Park. Even within the former gold fields, patches of HCS forest may occur, though the marshy sandy landscape makes this appear unlikely. If land has been considered for classification of underutilized low carbon land suitable for transition to oil palm, identification of the HCS forest becomes important but difficult, though rough measures have been proposed by palm oil companies such as GAR, in addition to scientific studies over wider areas. In terms of potential usage, ULC land may be found in a sparsely populated district, ignored by local people. It may be perceived to be infertile or lacking market access, or perhaps there was no compelling reason to change its status. Goh carried out studies in the Gunung Mas district of central Kalimantan and found the last case often applied. To change its use into that of oil palm is hardly considered, as mining was often the preferred occupation. And just to give another example, among the sites selected as underutilized for the government's most recent through the state program was one village in Gunung Mas, not identified for rice growing, but a failure nonetheless, in which even cassava crops were unsuccessful due to the unsuitable soils. Next one, please. Then we come to upgrading and diversifying downstream industries. Borneo is gradually losing its advantage of large tracts of cheap land for oil palm expansion. Shifting the local industries up the commodity chain requires advancement in manufacturing technologies, especially oleochemical industries and advanced biorefineries. However, such bio-based manufacturing requires strategic investments in infrastructure. So, for example, in Sarawak, the Bintulu Samalaju ports are a key node for advanced manufacturing, while in Sabah, the POIC, palm oil industry clusters in Lag Datu and Sandakan have a similar function. So photographs of those ports are there. There's no equivalent yet in Kalimantan, although the Meloy Batuta Trans-Kalimantan Special Economy Area in Kutai Timor, which hasn't actually done much yet, is planned to become a centre of oleochemical industry and energy, with exports through the small port of Meloy, which is being extended. We went and had a look at Meloy a few years ago, and it was just receiving tourist ships from Sulawesi, because there's very large numbers of migrants from Sulawesi living in this area in Kutai Timor and right through the coast. Borneo does not yet have an advanced oleochemical plant. However, there's a biodiesel plant in Bintulu and a smaller one in South Kalimantan. Of course, the EU is phasing out palm oil-based biodiesel by 2030, and this affects exports from Indonesia and Malaysia. While they have protested, both countries are boosting their local capacity to absorb more biodiesel. Indonesia is suggesting very high mixtures of biodiesel with diesel. Whether just to what extent this is really happening, I'm not certain. By 2019, Sabah's refining capacity exceeded its annual CPO production, and Sarawak's was 80%. By 2019, 74% of palm oil exported from Indonesia was refined. So that means that you didn't export crude palm oil. It is refined. This gives you good cooking oil. It gives you many other products, which are then able to be turned into things like confectionaries, chemical products, and so on. And so there's a whole range of things that can come from these refineries. We located 26 in Borneo, Sabah, the leader, of course, and Sarawak, and then a few in each of the others. But only 9 out of estimated 85 refineries in Indonesia are in Kalimantan. So it's always been a bit backward in terms of some of these industrial activities, which tended to take place in Sumatra or Java. Abundant agricultural and forestry residues are generated by the refining process, including empty fruit bunches and palm kernel shells, which are called bungkil inti sawit in Indonesian. These are known as biomass. The shells are currently exported to many countries, such as solid fuel for power generation and animal feed. So a lot of it goes to China, the animal feed to New Zealand, where it has revolutionized the industry providing milk for cattle, which do not have to eat grass anymore. They're able to eat bungkil inti sawit, which is quite interesting. Indonesia is beginning to co-fire biomass for power generation as part of an agreement to phase out coal. The PLN is looking for a cheap power source and has tried both gas and wood pellets, but those sources are considered too expensive, with sawdust being suggested. At the same time, much of this biomass is used as fertilizer, where of course it fills an important need. Sharing the excess hydropower of Sarawak, both with Sabah and its Indonesian neighbours, is also being planned and should assist future industrial development. While large new hydropower projects, for example, on the Kayan River, are planned for North Kalimantan using Chinese money. Next one, please. Number 4, certifying industrial cash crops for sustainability. Sustainable branding and certification of agricultural and forestry products may enhance market access and provide a price premium to the producer. The RSPO was established in 2004 for consumers to separate sustainable palm oil from an unsustainable counterpart. Its environmental and social standards are strict, so that members who comply have no difficulty in accessing the lucrative market of the EU. However, certification is expensive, so favours large growers. So far, the numbers of plantations in Indonesia and Malaysia that are RSPO certified are quite small. The principles and criteria of the standards are adjusted by country and revised centrally every few years, most recently in 2018. That revision stipulated that growers must apply free, prior and informed consent, FPIC, when taking over land, gaining the consent of the owners before clearing or planting. An alternative for growers is to enroll in the Indonesian Sustainable Palm Oil System, ISPO, which is compulsory but less stringent and does not require FPIC. However, this system is not accepted by the EU. A similar alternative in Malaysia, the MSPO, has similar acceptance problems. Just to give an example of things that are happening on the ground, because as John McCarthy said once, the RSPO doesn't seem to have much impact on the ground, and there's plenty of other things going on, especially illegal plantations. In central Kalimantan, many oil palm estates are illegal, taking over the second hectare of transmigrants if those lands are not developed quickly. The photos show such a situation in Desa Biru Maju in Kota Waringin Timur. The villagers have identified areas and trees planted in their legal village area and have been struggling to get the land back. No FPIC here, obviously. So this was a big project that while he was involved in, and they did not seem to be getting very far in trying to get their land back. It's very difficult once the plantation has actually planted the trees. But what they did was actually harvest the fruit and leave it lying on the ground so that it would just become useless. And then needless to say, the plantation management was very upset about all that. But yeah. Sabah decided in 2015 to move the entire state to full RSPO certification, smallholders included. Now, this was quite a huge thing. The Malaysian company, the Malaysian government was not very happy about this because they wanted everybody to go into the Malaysian MSPO. However, this is called the jurisdictional approach. It attempts to cover an entire administrative area to align all stakeholders to work together on conservation. In Sabah, the GAA is assisted by government and NGOs. Among its aims is to halt deforestation and secure sustainable livelihoods. However, once it got going, it was forced to downsize to include a smaller area, so it wasn't able to include the entire state, but it did include quite a lot of the major oil palm areas. A similar pilot study was conducted in Seruya, in central Kalimantan, supported by the Earth Innovation Research Institute, to establish the first agricultural facility to assist smallholders with training, agricultural inputs and finances. JAs have now followed in Sintang and Beral. However, the capacity of district governments is limited, and there is a big problem enforcing compliance on non-RSPO members in areas such as FPIC. However, it's an interesting thing to be trying, an interesting innovation. Okay, so let us look at eco-economy examples. How are we going to start? Okay. Commodifying ecosystem services. The concept of natural capital was created to explain the interactions between man-made economies and natural systems. Natural capital provides various ecosystem services to human society. A strategy that advocates incorporating ES into the contemporary market economy through monetizing nature with economic accounting practices has emerged as a means to address unsustainable land-based economies. This forms the basis for developing a conservation-oriented eco-economy. Payment for ecosystem services, PES, is used to describe such a strategy. Specifically for Borneo, it proposes the creation of compensation schemes for landholders who choose conservation over intensive cash crop cultivation, especially oil palm or logging. Borneo became a primary location for PES schemes in the 2000s due to the island's serious environmental degradation. Red Plus has been the major program tried in Kalimantan. Using international funds, it aimed to compensate land users who avoid degradation and deforestation for the opportunity costs of converting the land to agricultural production. The schemes have had serious problems, mainly with the distribution of benefits, the very mixed nature of village societies and the absence of formal tenure. There was an extension of the one from Suruyan to an area which consisted mainly of some Javanese trans migrants growing rice. And they would in no way ever have wanted to be involved in degradation or deforestation and so on. And so the question was, why should they get benefits? But there was still this question of distribution and many problems as to who got what with the money that might become available. Many villages still prioritize shifting cultivation over Red Plus. There was 4 schemes in Central Kalimantan, 1 in West, 1 in East. The Australian funded KFCP in the MRP covered 120,000 hectares. I took a picture, it's rather the collective notice board in Mantangkai village, showing a lack of direct communication. It was criticised for undermining local values of equality and autonomy, while villagers called it secretive. And it was terminated in 2013 after not having accomplished very much. The one scheme which was more successful was in Berau, where a jurisdictional approach was tried. And with good local leadership, it showed that such PES schemes can work. Next one, please. Establishing eco-based tertiary sectors, and here we move into ecotourism. The development of the tourism industry has been considered useful to achieve the dual goals of poverty eradication and conservation, especially for communities surrounding ecologically important areas. Sabah has been the leading tourist destination in Borneo, the attraction being Mount Kinabalu, the highest peak in Southeast Asia, while Sarawak has Gunung Mulu, both World Heritage Sites. However, much of that tourism is mass tourism in large hotels, rather than genuine ecotourism, more closely related to local villages who organise visits and provide services such as guides and homestays. Attracting international tourists to the small communities is not, however, easy. In 3 villages in Sabah, near the Tabing Wildlife Reserve, the system worked well when funding was supplied by JICA and thousands of Japanese tourists arrived. So local people could reorient their sources of income away from illegal hunting of the animals in the reserve. But when that funding was no longer available, tourism began to decline and the people had to revert to their old practices. The Kenya Omolung village of Stulan near Malinau in North Kalimantan has been able to operate an interesting ecotourism program since they were granted full management rights to their restricted forest, Tanah Ulen, a unique pristine forest with exceptional diversity in which tourists could stay overnight and experience a wide variety of bird and animal life, as well as the vibrant local culture. A different kind is operating in Sabangau National Park in Central Kalimantan. It only achieved park status in 2004 after it had been considerably degraded. It has a huge population of wild orangutan, but may be visited only during the rainy season in small canals. This core activity is necessarily expensive. Agritourism, including genital resin harvesting, is also promoted, with 5 of the 42 villages around the park becoming involved. Guest houses and jungle tracks have been organised and an art and culture studio established. So development is slow, but visitor numbers have grown. However, an important draw card seems to be needed, such as the wild orangutans or Situlan's pristine forest, for ecotourism to really succeed. However, although household income has increased, it remains unstable due to its seasonal nature. Jobs remain mainly part-time and informal. How economically stable is ecotourism in Borneo? It's been tried in several Indonesian national parks, especially where these are not too remote, and in new locations in Sabah. It should be designed and used strategically as part of a bigger plan for transforming the land-based economies. Next one, please. Marketing products from smallholders. The smallholder-centric approach seeks to connect the buyers more directly with the efforts of small farmers to improve their livelihoods. Effective branding provides opportunities for upgrading the value chain, but also improving the land use practices of farmers. Local specialties can be marketed through geographical indications, GI, that focus on the embodied place-related value. Barrio rice, a famous brand of organic upland rice grown in the Kalabit Highlands of Sarawak, received a GI in 2008. When I was there a few years earlier, I discovered that most of that rice was in fact being grown by Indonesians who'd come across from Krayan just across the border. It wasn't being grown by the local Malaysians, who most of whom had all migrated to the cities, leaving the old people living in the longhouses. However, its competitor Adan rice, grown across the Indonesian border in Krayan, received its GI in 2012, but had marketing problems as there was no road connection with Malinau, the nearest town in North Kalimantan. There was a road to the Kelabit village of Bakanalan, so most rice was sent there. A new road from Malinau is under construction to Longbawan, the main centre in Krayan, and is now almost complete. It was supposed to be completed before COVID hit, but that has, of course, set it back. They say by next year it should be fully operational. And Adan rice is supposedly the favourite rice of the Sultan of Brunei. The Krayan highlands also produce mountain salt, originating from salt springs. The salt contains iodine, which prevents goiter and disinfects small wounds, is used in preserving meat and fish. It's valued for its purity using traditional techniques, sold in small palm leaf wrapped packages. While Sarawak is famous for its black pepper and received a GI in 2006, a less well-known product is the Malonan Kutaikat and Negara white pepper with a sharp aroma, originally grown in the villages along the Balikpapan Samarinda Road by Bugis immigrants, which secured its GI in 2019. Interestingly, back in the 1990s, studies of that pepper growing met that the conclusion come to by the people who were involved in those studies suggested that white pepper was unsustainable. However, they persisted with it, and it's now got its GI, and it's quite successful. Borneo has always been a centre of diversity in fruits. However, the small purple kasturi mango is listed as extinct in the wild and now found only cultivated in gardens, mainly in South Kalimantan. By contrast, the yellow-fleshed durian pekawai, which grows freely in Kalimantan's forest and in Sarawak, lacks any unpleasant smell, has a sweet taste, and could be more widely promoted. Among the foods listed by the Slow Food Foundation for Biodiversity, which aims to reduce the disappearance of local food cultures and traditions, is forest honey in West Kalimantan, which contains enzymes and antioxidants and is used by pregnant women. It is produced by the giant rock bee, Apis dorsata, apparently a very dangerous insect on tall trees, which become partly submerged in the rainy season, so is harvested by boat. A song is chanted asking the queen bee's permission to harvest the honey in exchange for protecting the forest. Next one, please. And finally, encouraging traditional land use systems. The concept of self-sufficiency prioritizes food, fiber, fuel security by creating a diverse agroecological and socioeconomic landscape. It advocates for the traditional way of living through forging a healthy human-environment relationship. However, Borneo societies are now very complex, encompassing a range of ethnic groups, people of Dayak, Muslim and Chinese origin, with ancestors in place for several centuries, are mixed with newcomers from other parts of Indonesia, Malaysia and beyond. Traditional lifestyles inevitably vary, even within individual villages and families, while urbanization continues apace. In the future, technological advancement in food production and provisioning services may provide new means of development, allowing the deployment of small, decentralized, small, self-sufficient settlements spread across the island. How to smartly combine sophisticated technologies with traditional lifestyles, especially being supported by localized education, would be an interesting way to cope with unsustainable land exploitation as in the past. Meanwhile, the current example, one may examine particular efforts to support local cultures. The recent action of the Bupati of Sanggau district in reconstructing 8 longhouses as representative of the different diet groups in each area to be used for rice harvest festivals and other cultural events. The pictures show the opening of the final longhouse in Cheraju village. It's in Toba. It is named Pang Rayam after the first Dayak settler. This action was a symbolic replacement of some of the original longhouses destroyed during the Suharto period, but also a modern encouragement of traditional rice cultivation and pride in diet lifestyles. It's actually Kecamatan Toba. And Pak Ali, a friend of mine, sent me these pictures. I was supposed to be there, but unfortunately I got COVID just before I was leaving, so I missed it. Anyway, very interesting pictures. So let's just move on. How are we going for time?
5 more minutes, please.
5
more.
for me or altogether?
Just for you, because Chun Sheng is not available.
He's just arrived.
Oh.
But, we're just waiting to see whether he wants to join yet, but you can continue.
You can continue.
I can go for another, okay,
Yeah.
2 more slides, that's all.
Okay.
So this is called moving on, just looking to see what has happened during and post-COVID and predictions for the future. Sarawak is aiming to be a developed state by 2030. Strong emphasis on digital technologies and the use of bioeconomy strategies. It plans, however, to also rehabilitate some degraded forests, not easy, and develop their food industries. They didn't describe exactly how they would do that. Had more economic problems in Sabah during COVID and is trying to restore its tourism industry. The restrictions on movement during COVID meant that tourists just didn't come to Sabah. And that was its major industry, with an emphasis now more on ecotourism. Sabah proudly describes itself as the heart of Borneo, which is true of part of it, but also claims to be a global leader in sustainable palm oil. 3 policies in Indonesia have impact on Kalimantan: the creation of food estates during COVID to avert a possible food crisis, introducing an omnibus bill to make employment and investment easier, and relocating the capital to East Kalimantan from overcrowded and sinking Jakarta. All of these initiatives, of course, of President Jokowi. Food estates began in 2020 as rice estates on the peatlands of the XMRP. Many doubts were raised as to whether the estates would be repeated. Assurances of proper water management, a special rice variety, and even drones and floating tractors, whatever that may be, were said to ensure success. So the official map there shows suitable new rice areas which are coloured blue and contain, more than half of the area. Existing rice lands, green, and there's not too many of those. Other food crops, orange, and annual crops, deep peat brown, which is not supposed to be cultivated. The results have been poor, as studies in 2023 have shown, with researchers finding abandoned fields and rusting excavators, while rice production in central Kalimantan has actually fallen. The Omnibus Bill. The Omnibus Bill on job creation was passed by the Indonesian Parliament in October the 5th, 2020, designed to attract investment by reducing regulations, environmental laws, it weakened the legal protection for indigenous groups, and reduced basic labour rights. In fact, it seemed to upset more or less everybody. Opposition mounted against the bill as it was rushed through, prioritising the corporate sector interests. Criticised for its lack of transparency and public participation, the bill was examined by the Constitutional Court a year later, in November 25th, 2021, and ruled unconstitutional. It was ordered to be revised in 2 years after a dialogue with different layers of society. The government, however, preempted that. They issued a regulation, the Jobs Law, passed in December 22, arguing a compelling economic crisis. The problem is not over. Workers have threatened to hold a national strike in July or August this year. Next one, please. And this is the last one. The construction of the new capital in Sepaku, Penajam Pasir Utara, East Kalimantan, is proceeding with an official opening of the first section planned for Indonesia's National Day, August 17 next year. The official map shows the central area in pink, the surrounding development area in yellow, including the nearby coast and some sea, a total of 256,000 hectares. It lies between the 2 cities of Balikpapan in the south and Samarinda in the north, very close to Balikpapan, also including part of the district of Kutai Kartanegara. Despite doubts about its funding and management, President Widodo is confident that the project will succeed. I think he's looking for Chinese funds, but whether that will happen is an interesting question. Current activities involve improving access to the site, building a new link to the existing toll road between Balikpapan and Samarinda. That toll road has reduced the travel time between those 2 cities to about 1 hour. The original old road, which I've taken on numerous occasions, it took you 3 or 4 hours to do that. Current activity, wait a minute, where we are. The 13-kilometre EKN toll cuts through a protected forest and coastal mangroves. Although the city is supposed to be a green development, the toll road construction does give it a bad image. So one of the latest reports on what is going on, Indonesia's new capital won't sacrifice the environment, says Nusantara's Niona Asnawati Safitri, I think reasonably recently appointed to fend off questions about what might be happening. Niona says the capital development will in fact rehabilitate the environment, which has already been damaged. Well, there's a lot of planted forests there. There are also a lot of a few oil palm plantations, but more a lot of coal pits. Planted forest will be gradually turned back into mixed tropical forest, while no new permits will be issued for coal mines. They will try to use solar power and electric cars, but they will need another source of power, and the general consensus is for some time they will have to continue to use coal. Okay, just finishing. The indigenous people are, however, worried about their communal lands. Unlike the transmigrant group, they have no formal land papers and find themselves already marginalised. So the photos show the toll road, the Titik Nol Nusantara, the name of the city, the central point where everything begins with a planted forest behind it. Okay, let's see if CS has something to say.
Yeah, so Dr. Chun Sheng will join us through Zoom for 5 minutes, please. Dr. Chun Sheng.
Hello, CS.
Hi, Lesley. Hi, can you hear me?
Oh.
Can you guys hear me? Is the microphone working well? Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, hello.
Okay, good. Yeah, actually, I wanted to share a slide. But I think probably I too late to do that. Yeah, so as discussed with Lesley, I will add a few points on my latest observations and field studies in North Kalimantan. The coming decade may bring another wave of significant changes to Borneo, and one highly discussed topic is the IKN, described by Lesley just now, with all the details she found. However, I also want to bring your attention to the mega projects planned or already kickstarted in the North Kalimantan to support the regional development. So the way I see it is they come as a package together with the IKN. And one such project is the Tanah Kuning Indonesian Green Industrial Estate, which President Jokowi aims to develop as the country's largest green industry park in North Kalimantan. So it's along the coast in the north of the IKN. And this ambitious initiative is considered Indonesia's flagship endeavor to tap into advanced economies by establishing a green and high-value industrial sector. And at the core of this green industry plan is the establishment of a regional value chain for electric vehicle, EV manufacturing. Maybe you are aware of already that Indonesia has nearly a quarter of the world's nickel reserve, including large reserve in Sulawesi and North Maluku, so just next to Borneo, in Sulawesi, and also further to the east in North Maluku. So that makes the country has a comparative advantage in producing EV batteries because you have nickel. And so the current plan involves the utilization of mega hydropower supported by Chinese technologies as a primary source of electricity for the industrial park, including processing the ores from the nickel ores from the two islands I mentioned just now. So in about 3 years ago, or 4 years ago, in 2019, the construction of the Gayan hydropower project It's 9,000 megawatt, yeah, by Power China already commenced. Well, interestingly, Sarawak, the Malaysian state in the north, is also involved in another hydroelectricity project called Mentarang Indok. It's just about a few kilometers from Malinau, with a capacity of slightly more than 1,300 megawatt. So this is jointly developed by a local firm and Sarawak Energy. Yeah, so in my opinion, these grand plans for the green industry, it is still too early to say whether it can actually be realized or not. It's in its early stages, and so, but it is crucial to monitor the dynamics and also the complexities as it involves so many stakeholders, right? You've got hydropower, that mega hydropower, then you have this large industrial park, and also all the road buildings described by Lesley just now. So, and also you involve foreign capital and technology providers, particularly from China, Japan, South Korea, and of course also from Malaysia and probably Singapore as well. So that can be seen as both a blessing and a potential source of geopolitical issues. And this is something that is worth further observation. So over the past 9 months, I have traveled extensively in the border region of Sabah, Sarawak, and North Kalimantan. I have a border economy project of there. So throughout my journey, the Indonesians I spoke to exhibited adaptability, yeah, in the face of these rapid changes. You know, the people in Borneo, they actually expressed anticipation for even more significant and faster transformations brought about by the IKN and also these mega projects.
Sorry to interrupt you, Chun Sheng. We'll get on to the questions and answers now, because I know that we've got a big audience here and they're very eager to ask both of you some questions. So our projector's just cooling down for a bit, so we'll let that rest. We'll let Lesley answer some questions, and then we'll go back and the audience members can direct some questions.
Yeah, sorry, because I was told by Lesley that I should share some.
Oh, yeah, thank you. We've just run out of time a little bit, but we'll come back to you in a minute. Thank you.
No problem. Yeah, go ahead.
Apologize for the technical difficulties, but apparently the projector is too hot.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, thank you, Dr. Chun Sheng. Social environmental impact. So yeah, please, if there is any questions from our audience here, two gentlemen here, please. I forgot to know your name.
Thank you. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Yeah. So thank you, Lesley, for the presentation. Particularly interested in what you were saying about the food estates. And if I remember correctly, that was in effect almost a controlling gift to Prof. Military companies had the right to develop the food estate both in Kalimantan and also in Papua.
Yes, true.
The whole idea was that this was meant to be a contribution to food sustainability.
Yeah.
Sounds from what you're saying, at least in Kalimantan, that has been a total failure.
I think that the evidence isn't there yet, because a lot of it hasn't really happened. I mean, there are big plans to continue to do this. They were the people who wrote the most recent paper were interested in what was happening on the PLG, and they found that it wasn't working there as they had expected it would not work. So that seems to have been one of the problems. But even when they tried to grow cassava in Muluraya, that seemed to be, or Gunung Mas, that seemed to also fail. So what they were saying was that a lot of this situation in regard to food estates was very rushed. The president was wanting it to happen very quickly. He expected there would be a huge food crisis with COVID, and he wanted everybody to be planting, well, rice, but other crops as well, other food crops as well. And so I think this was one of the problems, that some of the same mistakes that happened years ago with President Suharto's program seemed to be just replicated, that they were rushing into it with a great deal of self-confidence, I might add. What floating tractors are, I have no idea, but certainly the excavators didn't float. And this is one of the really difficult things. They were underestimating the actual environmental problems of trying to grow these crops on a large scale very quickly in these areas. Now, I worry about the projects in Papua. There have been other projects with food estates before in Papua and other places. It's not a new concept. And in general, they haven't worked. So why keep doing it? It just seems to be, oh, let's do that. They'll give us a lot of rice in a hurry. But, you know, most of the rice in Kalimantan, in fact, comes from Java. You have to look and see what's happening in Java. Are people still growing rice there? Or is urbanization now taking away so much land that they can't continue to grow rice? What else might be a possible way of getting more rice production? Well, you know, the Dayaks like to grow rice. But, you know, there have been plenty of difficulties in allowing their traditional systems to continue to work in much of Kalimantan. And of course, they've been pressured into becoming either all palm smallholders or simply workers on estates. So that it is a problem. It's a serious problem. So far, Indonesia has just solved it by importing rice from Vietnam. But even that probably can't go on forever, because the Vietnamese are getting a bit worried about their own supplies. So yeah, it's something which hasn't been solved. But I think it's just that the most recent reports seem to suggest that some of these plans, with a good deal of hoo-ha and so on, haven't actually come to fruition. And there's still a lot of problems with people's diets, and this is something I didn't mention, but you know, there's a lot of stunting of small children, especially in central Kalimantan. There's a lot of inadequate diet for infants, and so that there needs to be a whole range of other food crops being grown, not just oil palm. And so this is the one thing which needs to be considered. Perhaps the oil palm estates themselves would consider, you know, putting some of their land into some of these other food crops. And that seems to be one possibility.
Keith first and then online. Yeah.
Thanks, Lesley. So I guess, you know, looking at Borneo as a whole, and from your descriptions, it's sort of, you could sort of paint it as, you know, a very large extractive resource frontier, and sort of a dependency relationship.
Sorry, a very attractive frontier for?
It's you could understand Borneo as a type of resource frontier that's characterized by extractive development, and that situates Borneo in an unequal or dependent relationship with Java or with the region or what have you. So my question is, you know, over your long career, do you see those dependency relationships evening out a little bit? Or do you see Borneo as still situated in a dependent, extractive, subordinate relationship with the rest of Malaysia or Indonesia or the region?
Yeah, well, the Malaysian states have actually got much more advanced in terms of technology, particularly Sarawak. But that's at the cost of, you know, a lot of their land is supposed to be reserved for indigenous people, and they've just constantly created more dams and shifted the people out. The Penang were the most recent ones, and they said, "No, what are we supposed to do? We don't want to grow oil palm, you know." And these sorts of things have been happening, so that Kalimantan has tended to be somewhat neglected in terms of, you know, industry and so on, because we've always got Sumatra, you've got Java, of course, with a huge population. So Kalimantan is seen as some sort of resource frontier indeed. And so, okay, let's cut the forest, let's grow oil palm, blah, blah. it's coming to an end because these things are not going to happen forever. And even the markets for some of the oil palm products are drying up. So, and of course, then you have the question of climate change. And a lot of the increased temperatures, it's considered that a lot of areas are going to become unsuitable for palm oil. So what do you do then? The areas in the uplands, most of which are still growing rice and in traditional cultivation, they are going to be much more important and favoured than some of these lowlands, especially, say, the areas in Sarawak along the coast, which are largely peat, recently into oil palm, and a lot of the areas in central Kalimantan, similar. So the future of oil palm isn't guaranteed, but then perhaps it's better to have smaller areas of oil palm, which you then manage to use the chemical techniques and make sure that you can get all the possible products from a smaller area and turn these other areas into food crops and so on. So I think the time is coming for Borneo to be no longer a resource frontier. There's already a lot of degradation. The future doesn't look too good. We're getting perhaps an El Nino next year. This will mean maybe more droughts, more fires. Those fires have immense amounts of carbon into the atmosphere. There's a huge problem with some of these things continuing. So obviously other strategies have to be looked into, and particularly looking into more attention to food crops, more attention to rice growing maybe, but not on the PLG, and just looking into what technology can do to improve the yields and so on. And CS wrote an interesting chapter in the book which looks at the impact of the digital revolution. Of course, everybody now in Indonesia has a hand phone. Everybody uses that for communication. You know, when I first went to Kalimantan, I had to go from way up in the boonies, up in the mountains, come down to Banjarmasin, get into the telephone system, hope that somebody would be home when I made a call. And if they weren't, well, then I had to go back up again. All this took a day to do that. Now, of course, you can phone everywhere. And then there's all these other technological developments which are occurring. These are going to help. They're going to make it possible to perhaps use less land and grow products which will then be able to be turned into things which are required by the market. But they need to preserve as far as possible some of the unique features of Borneo, particularly those unique features which exist still up in the highlands, with the amazing forest, which is still there. A lot of it is so far in conservation areas, but these things are very important to continue to be conserved. Sorry, go on, Trevor.
Yeah, Catherine, please.
So the online question is from James Fox. And
Oh, yes.
question is, can either you, Lesley, or Chun Sheng, can you say anything about Andrew Forrest's involvement in the green mega project in North Kalimantan?
In the what?
The Green Mega Project in North Kalimantan.
The green mega project in North Kalimantan. CS, can you deal with that?
Well, I know about North Kalimantan, but I don't know about Andrew Forrest. So I have no idea.
One of the richest people in Australia.
Yeah, well.
No, I don't know. I don't know anything about it. Sorry, Jim, you better tell me. I know there are a lot of projects happening in Kaltara, and it's been a neglected place. It's only recently been made into a new province, and so lots of things are happening there, but a lot of it is using Chinese money, and again, that's another question. But yeah, no, I don't know anything about it. Sorry, Jim.
Yeah. Second question, Catherine?
Yes, from Teza Napikapulu. Which political interests are founding or showing interest for slow development, slow food, protection of forests, Indigenous rights? So which political interests are showing interest for slow development.
Did you hear that?
Could you repeat that?
Which political interests
Oh.
are showing interest in slow food, slow development?
Does it mean like
Um,
whether the government's interest is now in slow food? Or slow
I think some of the NGOs are interested in that, but the political interests generally go for the coal and the palm oil. And they don't have much away from that, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
Go on,
Yeah.
go on. Yeah, sorry.
No, I mean, I can say something after you. You finish? Are you finished?
people Lesley? Yes, yes,
Yes.
you can go. Yes, yes.
All right, sure. Yeah, I think what we observe in places like Sarawak, right? I think people notice that the politicians notice that logging and oil palm are no longer profitable business, especially logging. It has stopped for like 2-3 years in some of the areas. So you see if you look at the statistics, the deforestation rate has gone down rapidly in the past 3-4 years in Borneo island as a whole. And for oil palm, the biggest challenge is we don't have enough labor force. I mean, you have this rise in the wages of the Indonesian laborers. So it's actually a very serious issue, especially in Malaysia. And they couldn't find people to actually harvest the fruits and etc. So when you talk about political interest, yeah, there's a strong interest in carbon credit. I mean, carbon in general, to generate a new income from carbon and also more downstream activities like bio-based industries, biofuels, and stuff like that. Yeah, so I think if you talk about alternatives, yeah, actually these are the things that the politicians at least in Sarawak are looking into, in Sabah as well. But Sabah is I would say is more organized in Sarawak when you talk about these initiative and policies and projects. Just to add a few.
Thanks, Chun Sheng. And yeah, the gentleman in the back, please. Thank you.
Yeah, Lesley, hi, congratulations.
Hello, Hal.
Wonderful to hear also, reflecting the decades you've spent working on the island. I want to ask you, what's happened to living standards in Kalimantan? I mean, we now have reasonably good estimates of poverty in Indonesia and in Malaysia. So what's happened to living standards on the ground with all this development? And a sort of subsidiary question, across the border, the national borders, is there now pretty much free movement of people and goods? I mean, is it really sort of one economic unit?
Yeah, okay.
Long time ago, when I went to the border, it seemed to be
Yeah,
a pretty open border. But that was
yep. Oh, you mean between Kalimantan and Malaysia?
Yeah.
Yes, pretty open borders. A lot of it, some of it illegal. The timber industry has been stopped, and that was definitely in favor of Malaysia. They reckon that when they did that, the Indonesians got some money out of it, but the Malaysians got a whole lot more, and the forest, the timber that they got was valuable. So they said somewhere, there's a quote: the Indonesians got a cow, and the Malaysians got a cow. The Indonesians just got a chicken. So they didn't manage to do very well from that. But the borders are reasonably open. There are a number of crossing points and so forth. In terms of people moving in, one of the interesting things is not so much with Kalimantan, not so much transmigration, but independent movement of a lot of people who see Kalimantan's land as cheaper. And this particularly happens in central Kalimantan. We found a lot of people had moved from Sumatra, from Riau, for example, and they were setting up small oil palm areas in central Kalimantan because they could get cheaper land there. And people from Jakarta were also investing in land there because it was cheaper. So there's those sorts of things happening, a lot of movement of people. And of course, right down the East Coast, the Buginese, the people from Sulawesi, having quite an impact, particularly now in North Kalimantan. And so, yes, a lot of individual movement going on. Sabah and Sarawak are pretty much self-sufficient states in the sense that, you know, you can't easily move from Indonesia into one of those places without having various other sorts of restrictions. But they seem to be able to manage themselves. Sabah not so much as Sarawak. Sarawak seems to do pretty well from various kinds of projects, and having all this cheap power, of course, helps. And there was an idea of actually putting a pipeline under the sea and sending power to Peninsular Malaysia, but so far that hasn't happened. But yeah, the general living standards, I think, are much better in Kalimantan than when I first went there. Certainly, it's people are living in general reasonable lifestyles, but not if you're a plantation labourer. That is a pretty difficult job, and in many cases, Indonesians are still being used on the Malaysian plantations. So there's a lot of variation there, but there's also a lot of urbanization, and a lot of people have moved to the cities, and you know, they're catching the lifestyles as they can, mostly from informal activities. So it's much the same in a way as Sumatran cities or Javan cities. You know, you find Banjarmasin, for example, has grown enormously since I was first there in the 1980s. And but it's not necessarily any more receptive to good lifestyles, and it's also very low lying. So if the sea level rise, there could be a lot of problems in cities like that in the future. Sorry. Sorry, I go on. Go on.
Oh, okay. Can I add something?
Sure, yes, go ahead.
So this is a very interesting question about border, because I have been doing a lot of field studies in the border region in the past 9 months between Sabah and also North Kalimantan. So what we see in the part of Borneo, you know, the highlands, the Krayan highlands, and the border there, actually the people living there, they are actually from the same tribe. It's called Lundaye or Lumbawa, but they live in different parts. I mean, on the different sides of the border. So that creates a lot of issues. That's one thing. Then the sea border is something very different. On the coastal area, Tawau and also Nunukan. So I will start with the inland first. So the inland, the Krayan highland, actually is very interesting because it's basically isolated from other parts of Kalimantan or Indonesia. But what happened in recent years is that there are quite a lot of migrants from Sulawesi and Java or even NTT moving to Krayan highlands. And that has changed the composition of the the population there in terms of ethnicity. And that has created quite a lot of anxiety on the Sarawak side, considering also the relocation of the capital to East Kalimantan. Then you have all this route connection from Balikpapan all the way to Krayan highlands, and then to Sarawak, and then to Lawas, or through Sabah to KK, to Kota Kinabalu. So that has created quite a bit of issues or concerns among the Malaysians in Sarawak and Sabah, because they were used to a more, slow kind of lifestyle on the highlands and inland. But the influx of migrants has created some worries about what they call dilution of the culture by the outsiders. This is how they see it. Well, but you see a very interesting difference between the Malaysian and the Indonesian. Although they are from the same tribe, they speak the same indigenous language, but their perspectives are quite different. The Indonesians generally are more open to changes, and the Malaysians, the Sarawakians, and the Sabahans, they are quite reluctant to see these kind of changes. So we may see a more tightened control of border in the next few years because of these changes, because of the worries by the Malaysians, on the Malaysian side. But then on the coastal area, it's quite interesting because Malaysians are actually very eager to open up the more trade routes there. So, I mean, Indonesia has this policy, the Jokowi has this policy of developing from the periphery. So, a lot of investment has been made in the border region to open up the border from the Indonesian side, mainly for political reason. So, it's not so much economic consideration, but it's because of political consideration. But then the Malaysian side are not ready. The Indonesian side, they you want to leverage on the Malaysian side, the border region to jumpstart the economy in North Kalimantan and in general in Kalimantan, right? But the Malaysian side is not ready to have these changes, and especially when things moving so fast on the Kalimantan side. So these are the observations I have seen. I believe the things will change quite substantially in the next few years, especially in the border region, because the state government of Sabah and Sarawak, they are reacting towards these changes. So they are making some new strategies as a response to what happened in Kalimantan. And I think that is something that worth close observation. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Chun Sheng. One more questions from Catherine?
I have one question online from Fazila Majid Cook, and this is about Indigenous communities' control of their land. And the question is, with the transformation of Borneo for large-scale development of dams, palm oil plantations, has it ridden on the loss of control of Indigenous lands for development? And to what extent is getting back control of management a way to go for Indigenous communities?
Do you want to talk about Sarawak?
No, you go ahead. I didn't have. Okay, now
well, one of the problems with Sarawak, and I'll say a little bit, is that a lot of the land is supposed to be Indigenous land. And people are supposed to have control over that land. However, the government continues to develop large projects like more dams, and seems to be simply taking over a lot of Indigenous land, and that is very serious for the lifestyles of people who are pushed into simply being oil palm workers. In Kalimantan, well, yeah, in a way that the same sort of thing happens. I found in parts of central Kalimantan, like Kota Waring and Timor, where there's a very large oil palm developments there. When the smallholders who had the land originally were invited to get a couple of hectares, they were told, oh yes, well, all right, you can become a smallholder, but you have to wait for about 3 years until the palm grows up before you can get any benefit from that. So they simply sold their land. And a lot of people are selling their land, which means that the people coming in get the land cheaply, and the original people are left as plantation laborers or perhaps workers moving to the city and so on. So there's a lot of problems involved in that situation, in people trying to keep control over land in the oil palm areas, and outside the oil palm areas, it's easier, and people still have control over their land, and they can do more or less what they like with it. But in many cases, they prefer to grow rubber, for example, and rice rather than oil palm, and I found that in a lot of the Dayak communities. But it's a question, I suppose, of money, and if they want to increase their income, well, they feel that perhaps they've got to go to the oil palm or mining, and that's another possibility.
CS, do you have anything to add to that for Dr. Fazila question on Indigenous people? Yeah.
Hello, Fazila. I don't have much to add. I mean details, but in general, I am not so worried about the future, because to me the things are getting better. And as you can see from the statistic, the deforestation rate has decreased substantially in the past few years. So probably Borneo has reached a stage that we have passed the stage that we will see more expansion and more land exploitation and social conflicts. I think the biggest challenge here is what are the options we have to further the, well, for the politicians, growth, right? So they are looking for different options on the table, like carbon credit and downstream activities, tourism and stuff like that. So I guess I'm quite positive about, at least on the Malaysian side, but I do have some concerns about mining. And also the energy issues. For example, in Sabah, I think Fazila, you were in Sabah for many years. So now what happened in Sabah is now they are considering coal mining because they have this gap in the power shortage. And also on the Kalimantan side, probably mining will also continue. So to me, mining will be more of a concern in the next couple of years. And not so much from oil palm and logging. Yeah. That's my take.
Thank you. Yeah, especially mining for critical minerals, I guess now.
Yeah, thanks very much, Lesley. At last we have the wonderful report. I'm puzzled at the big takeaway from the question that bothers me about why Borneo has always been the land of failed dreams and ambitious schemes that go wrong. Why it remains so underpopulated despite, or perhaps because, it's the one place that isn't threatened by natural disasters and volcanic activity and so on. It seems to me environmentalists owe us some sort of idea about, or the historians maybe, or whoever, some sort of sense to take away from this. Is it really that Borneo has suffered from specific lacks like investment, communication, stable political conditions, etc.? Or is it really that the environment of Borneo is poor and it's always been an illusion to imagine that this place could be productive?
An interesting philosophical question. Well, certainly there's a lot more development there than there used to be. But if you compare, say, Sarawak and its level of industry and so on with parts of Kalimantan, West Kalimantan, for example, then certainly the Malaysian territories are way ahead from that sort of area, but not necessarily in a good way, because they're sacrificing a lot of things to get there. Borneo has always been this magnificent place which has these marvelous forests and the orangutans and everything else. Well, yes, but these are diminishing. The orangutans are endangered. You can see the wild ones in the Savannah National Park, as Keith did. Yeah, I think that things are not necessarily all that bad. It's just that Sumatra is closer. A lot of things that are happening that happen in Kalimantan happened first in Sumatra, and they have got much more development going, and they have also got a much better system in terms of the oil palm, with many more smallholders in charge of their oil palm systems and doing well.
So you're saying it's not the sort
in Sumatra? Yeah, much better. Yeah, but Kalimantan is still the place for the big people to go in, the big concession holders and so on. And now, of course, they're looking for Chinese money, which raises a lot of doubts. So whether this would really happen, but certainly Jokowi was interested. Already there's some Chinese money and some transportation developments and so on. But they're interested even in perhaps financing the relocation of the capital. Who knows? Do you want to contribute, please?
You're on mute, CS.
Okay, when it comes to foreign capital, previously we tried to understand who are these people, but then we realized that it seems like very challenging for to go get sufficient investment from even China or Japan or South Korea to realize his various mega projects in Kalimantan. The only thing that I believe the likelihood of being realized is the nickel supply chain. That includes also the hydropower because it's about resource extraction. So that kind of investment probably will continue to take place. That means they build the mega hydropower and then they ship the nickel ores from Sulawesi and Maluku, North Maluku to North Kalimantan, and they use this hydropower to process the ores. And whether they can build the EV manufacturing, the regional value chain or not, I have doubts. But yeah, in terms of resource extraction, probably it will continue. And but that will be a different kind of issues compared with oil palm and logging. So it will become something, some other kind of challenges for Borneo rather than the same old issues in the past. Yeah. That's my.
Thank you. One more question, one last questions. I guess we give opportunities to, yeah.
Thank you. The districts and agencies you mentioned in the presentation are mostly they have alliances to the green district. They have alliances. The green district. There's an alliances in Indonesia for the district to have pledge to keep their forest like 60% to 70%.
Could you repeat that for me, please?
Yeah. Your question? Yeah. So, but one of the districts below in East Kalimantan have the highest temperature rise right now. So, how their alliances give impact for the environment in Kalimantan?
Do you want me to repeat that?
Yeah.
Sorry.
There is the associations of green districts in Indonesia. And one of the members is Berau.
Yes, that's right.
However, Berau currently has the highest increase in its temperature.
If what?
Temperature.
Temperature.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So, do you have any insights on the impact of this green association, green district association in what happened in Berau?
No, I'm sorry, and I didn't know about the higher temperatures there. What is causing that?
You know what's causing is it deforestation or temperature? Partly.
Maybe partly deforestation and mining because they're all very active in this area. So they have pledged to keep their like 60 to 70% forest. But nowadays we have news that the route has the highest rise temperature.
So it's getting very hot in Berau.
We always consider Berau as one of the standout places that seem to manage to do things right. You're saying that this is so?
But I think climate change plays a major role here, and global climate change. So it's not necessarily the local conditions, but also because of the external factors. Yeah.
So I guess, Ibu Lesley, do you have any last comment or?
No, thank you for all your questions. And what were you going to ask, Budi?
Time for this question. One more.
Okay. Yeah. So in the beginning, you mentioned there is a big difference on land property right regime in Kalimantan and in the Malaysian part.
Yeah.
The Malaysian part has more autonomy, and I just wonder how much this difference and the change of land property right regime and the way that land capture happening is actually driven the type of development in Kalimantan.
Yes,
Land rights fencing, the difference of.
so,
Yeah, so you mentioned in the beginning that the Malaysian part has more autonomy.
yes, it's got more autonomy, yes.
But then the Malaysian is also changed. And so I just wonder how much is changed and the difference of land type regime between those areas actually driven the change of development in the because it seems to me that Kalimantan will always be important in terms of resources. Imagine that the East Asia is growing and need electricity, and if we focus on renewable electricity, a big island with a small density of population is Kalimantan, very close to the East Indonesia. So this everything is about land. And so I just wonder whether you look at it and how dynamic it is.
Yeah, I've lost the train of thought. I think one of the things in Kalimantan, I mean, you know, the central government policies are always there, but they don't always work out at the local levels. And if you've got really good governors in some places, they're able to institute a lot of new things and good things. Unfortunately, I mean, this happened in East Kalimantan, it happened in Central Kalimantan, but unfortunately, the tenure of these governors is never very long. And as soon as that one governor disappears, the good things tend to go with the governor. And so, you know, it's reliant seems to be on individual good people who are able to bring changes, but then these changes aren't necessarily going to be permanent. You know, you have Diagnostic, for example, in Central Kalimantan and various other ideas of trying to improve the amount of land that Dayaks can get and look after their interests and so on. Great. Well, you had one very good governor there. As soon as he stopped being a governor, everything seemed to fall in. And even things like, you know, some of the other kinds of developments where you're getting money coming in from outside and so on. These things tend to be very temporary and they don't seem to have a lasting impact. And that seems to be one of the difficulties. It's very hard to have the continuous improvement in the situation. And even, as I say, even people laud Sarawak and say, oh yeah, you know, they're doing so well. Okay, well, they've got all this cheap energy, but on the basis of what? And this is one of the problems for that. I know you like Sarawak.
No. I'm very neutral and objective here. I just want to add a point.
1 minute, yes, we ran out of time.
Okay.
All right, sorry.
Okay, well, thank you everyone. And again, congratulations to Bu Lesley and CS on their book. The book is available here for
Oh, yes.
$45.
$45